Hello everyone, welcome to our daily devotion. Today is Tuesday, June 2nd, already June in this whirlwind that is 2020. I hope you're hanging in there with the quarantine and all the craziness going on in our world. I pray that we are continuing to be faithful and be fervent in prayer and fervent in study. So today is June 2nd, and our devotion text comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 9 through 13. Now, a little bit of backstory about Ecclesiastes. The writer never identifies himself, but we presume it's Solomon, Solomon king in Jerusalem. And what you need to know about Solomon is he was the wisest man on earth, but he also was very rich, very powerful, and did a lot of things to excess. And so the first couple chapters of Ecclesiastes starts to explain to us that Solomon is testing all these things to try to see if there's any satisfaction to be found in them. And so can he be satisfied in, if there was a party to be thrown, he threw a bigger one. If there was a house to be lived in, he built a bigger one. If there was a garden to have, he grew a bigger one. All these things he did to excess. And he found that trying to find satisfaction in them, what he calls chasing the wind. Now, I'm a larger individual, and I always think about chasing the wind as if I'm getting out of my car and a receipt blows out of my car and across the parking lot. Because of the wind, I'm waving bye-bye to that receipt. I'm not catching it. And so chasing the wind, like chasing a receipt through the parking lot, is a useless endeavor. And so what Solomon is telling us is that when we try to find satisfaction in anything of this world, it's going to be like chasing the wind. And so what I want to read to you in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 is kind of Solomon turning the corner to say everything is temporary. And so he's come in with the first 8 verses saying that there's a time for everything. God has appointed a time for us to be born, a time for us to die, a time for it to make war, a time to make peace, a time to be angry, a time to be happy. There's a time for everything. And what we're going to find out, and I'm just going to go and get into it, is teaching point number 1, that everything is temporary. So let's read Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting in verse 9, and see what even the work that we do on this earth is temporary, and how our attitude should be shaped because of that. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 9 says this: "What gain has the worker in his toil? I have seen the busyness that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them," that's us humans, "than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man." And so what Solomon is saying, first and foremost, like I said, is that everything is temporary. Everything is temporary. Our time to be born is temporary. Our lives are temporary. So when I read Ecclesiastes, I always think about my great-grandparents' great-grandparents. Now, that might sound funny, but here's something that sounds even more funny or funnier. I don't know a thing about my great-grandparents' great-grandparents. I know they existed because I'm here. But I don't know anything about their lives. But I'm going to wager that whatever they were doing with their life, the job they had, the house they kept, the family they raised, was really important to them. Yet I don't know a thing about them. Now fast forward 6 generations in the future, is anybody going to know a thing about you or me? Are we going to be in the history books? I certainly hope I'm not in a history book. In fact, you could shorten that down to 1 generation. How many of you know much about your parents' childhood? How many of your children know anything about your childhood? Yet whatever we were doing in that time, in that temporary time, was extremely important to us. So what I want to get to is that because things are temporary, number 2, things are beautiful. Because God has set everything temporarily, because everything we know, we do, we love, we work for is going to go away, it becomes more beautiful to be on this earth. Our relationships become more valuable. Our time spent with our children becomes more valuable. Our time spent with our parents and grandparents becomes more valuable. Because of that temporary thought process. But let me get to point number 3. it's only valuable if we recognize it as a gift from God. Number three, our temporary time here is only valuable if we recognize it as a gift from God. And so I know that all this is going to go away. My children are going to grow up and they're going to move out of the house. I've already had one move out. Many of you have already had adult children move out from your house. And it's going to be up to them whether or not they walk in faith. It's going to be, I use my son by name, Jacob. It's going to be up to him if he walks in faith. It's going to be up to him if he obeys God with his life. I can no longer coach him or make those decisions. Now, he can call me for advice and I can give it, but he no longer is influenced by me on a day-to-day basis. And so my relationship with my own two sons, Miles and PJ, become extremely valuable. My relationship with the Lord. So what I want to stress is that we find so much value and try to find so much satisfaction in the job we work, the house we have, the car we own, the stuff we had. And Solomon says it's chasing after the wind. But a life lived that values God, that seeks after God, is a life that is valuable, no matter how temporary it is. Some of the greatest heroes of the faith died in their early ages, and their life was valuable because of their seeking after God, and God honored that, and they stand in heaven today with God because of those things. And so I want to shift our priorities a little bit, and maybe the world needs to hear this, because we find such value in fighting or in arguing and in finding our differences rather than finding beauty in other image bearers of God. Not saying that we're all children of God, but that we are all image bearers of God, and we should find value in people enough to tell them of their sin, enough to tell them of the hope that they have in Jesus Christ, enough to educate our children and raise them up as disciples, enough to disciple one another and walk one another and not forsake meeting together as we have grown accustomed to. And all these things become more and more beautiful because we are fervently following after God. And so I believe what this scripture is teaching is that, yes, everything is temporary. Number one, everything is temporary. Number two, things that are temporary become beautiful. But number three, things that are temporary become valuable when we recognize them as gifts from God. When we recognize the breath in our lungs, the time we have with our family, the fact we have income and a job, we recognize that as a gift from God, and that God is the prize, not the satisfaction. We can never be satisfied. I can't even be satisfied in my own relationships with people. I have to find satisfaction in God and know that He has blessed me with all these temporary things that are so beautiful and so valuable and should be cherished in such a way that we give thanks to God through it. And so I hope this makes sense to you. I hope that we can understand. I hope that you'll take time to invest in reading much more of Ecclesiastes. It's probably one of my favorite books of the Bible. Not to pick out favorites, but it's one that I fell in love with at a very early age in my study. And I would encourage you to read through it. And you'll find that Solomon was not perfect. Solomon made his own mistakes. But in this point, Solomon realizes the value of seeking after God, the value of finding satisfaction in God. And so this is Brother Daniel with our daily devotion. God bless. No devotion tomorrow night, being Wednesday. I'll be meeting with the kids. We'll be back on Thursday. And I pray that you will tune in to Brother Jeff's Bible study tomorrow night at 6:30 on Facebook Live. So God bless.